Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if 14 gods watched Orochimaru break Naruto, and decided to rewrite his fate. God Chosen Naruto, Harem, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. A 12-year-old blonde-haired boy who would normally have sparkling blue eyes was glaring with hate-filled slitted blood-red eyes at the traitor Orochimaru of the Sannin who had attacked his team during the second part of the Chunin exams, in the Forest of Death. This boy had been blown away by a powerful wind jutsu that almost knocked him out, but the boy had gotten up just in time to avoid being eaten alive by a giant dark brown snake that had looked at him like a tasty snack. The boy had quickly summoned his new sword that he had been given by his friend Hakuyuki after the girl had come with his group to Konoha after her father figure had been killed slaughtering Gato to help save the country of Wave. This sword was actually quite legendary and was known as the Kubikiribocho, and the boy had thanked Haku for giving it to him and trained his blonde off trying to honor Zabuza's memory. His teammate and arrogant known as Sasuke Uchiha had gotten extremely jealous and tried to make him hand over the legendary sword. Our hero had told the arrogant boy to kiss his and go brood somewhere else. His other teammate had then gotten involved and tried to take the sword from him, and the boy was forced to make the pink-haired girl reconsider and leave him alone. This had obliterated the little bit of teamwork his team had. His sensei then goes and enters the three of them in the Chunin exams like a silver-haired idiot. It had been all good, as our hero had bluffed his way through the written part of the exam and had already managed to get the team the scroll that they needed to enter the tower. Then this shit happened and all of his hard work had literally been swallowed as the arrogant emo had handed Orochimaru their heaven scroll, foolishly thinking that the traitorous snake Sannin really wanted a petty scroll. Our hero had, after calling Sasuke a coward, had attacked Orochimaru and was to both of their surprise pushing the snake Sannin back. This had upset the man who kicked it up several notches and he was soon beating Naruto like a filthy rug. Naruto had been expecting his teammates to jump in at any moment, so imagine his shock when he looked up and both of the traitors were gone, leaving him at the non-existent mercy of the snake. Orochimaru, spotting both of his teammates gone, scowled and said, "Well, it seems as your teammates have you left alone with me, Naruto-kun." Naruto, with a scowl of his own, said, "Those traitors." He then, realizing that he didn't see Kubikiribocho where he left it, unconsciously unleashed his killing intent as he said, "Those stole my sword." Orochimaru, hearing this, chuckled and said, "It seems as they did, not that it matters as I'm going to kill you, Naruto-kun." He then went back to beating Naruto like he was a filthy rug, even going so far as to bury Naruto under numerous trees. He, chuckling at the pile of trees he had buried Naruto under, said, "If you aren't dead from the beating, then curse seal I gave you will finish the job." He then, licking his lips, turned towards the direction Sasuke and Sakura had ran and said, "Now for my true target and his little dog." He then vanished to chase after the idiots. Naruto under the tree wasn't faring well at all, as Orochimaru had blocked off his access to the Kyuubi, had beat him like a rag, given him an evil hickey of doom and then buried him under all of these trees. Naruto, feeling himself passing on, growled and said, "Traitors." In a large oval room, with multiple throne-like chairs surrounding a large glass orb, 15 of the thrones were occupied. The first throne and the one closest to the orb was occupied by a woman appearing to be in her mid-teens. She had long sandy blonde hair, and deep brown eyes. She was dressed in a sandy kimono, with small blue marks on it. Swinging behind her was a large barbed tail. Sitting beside this woman was a woman appearing to be in her late teens. She had long wavy blue hair, dark brown skin, and swinging behind her was two flaming cat tails. She was dressed in a very short skirt, and a top barely holding back her incredible bust. Sitting behind to the right of her was a woman appearing to be in her 20s with shoulder-length mint green teal hair. Her skin was strangely also teal. Her eyes were a cold orange. She was dressed in a bathing suit, as three scarf-like tails swung behind her. Sitting to her left was a woman with short spiky lava-colored hair. Her skin was fair, and her eyes were a bright pink. She looked as though she was built for competitions. She was dressed in a samurai outfit. Swinging behind her were 4 monkey tails. Sitting to the left of her was a woman appearing to be in her mid-20s with pale skin, hell it was white. She had a Heim-style haircut, while her hair was a light blue. Her eyes were black and powerful. She was dressed in simple gray shirt and panties. Swinging behind her was 5 tails. Behind her and to the right was a woman appearing to be in her late 20s. She had long yellow hair that seemed to be slimy. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were also yellow. She was dressed in what looked like shorts and a slime-covered bra. Swinging behind her was 6 slimy tails. To her right was a woman appearing to be in her late 20s. She had long flowing jade green hair and orange eyes. Her skin was a light ebony brown. She was dressed in true samurai armor, an impressive sword to complete the look. Swinging behind her were 7 tails. Next to her was a woman also in her late 20s, with dark brown skin also. She had purple hair that was plaited. Her eyes were white. She was dressed in a purple tunic, the top barely containing her very large. Curled around her were 8 tails. Sitting next to her was a woman in her late 20s. She had long flowing princess-like blood-red hair. Her eyes were also blood-red with a bit of black. Her skin was tan, and she was dressed in a royal kimono, her very large being displayed amazingly in the kimono. Swaying behind her were 9 tail. Behind and to the left of her was a woman appearing to be in her early 30s. She had long flowing black hair that seemed to encompass the night. Her eyes were blood red, with 3 solid black rings, and 9 solid black commas, 3 on each ring surrounding a slitted pupil. She was dressed in a earth-brown kimono, barely holding her huge in. Lying on her throne was 10 black tails. Sitting beside her was a woman appearing to be in her early 30s. She had spiky white hair that looked soft. Her skin was pale, and her eyes were this deep blue. She was dressed in a pure white kimono, tied tightly, but still showing that like the last few women, she had big. She had no tails, but her throne was snow white. Beside her was a woman appearing to be in her early 30s. She had short pink hair that seemed to be frayed. Her skin was dark brown, yet flawless. Her eyes were orange and seemed to be bored. She was dressed in a simple kimono that was slightly open, revealing her large. The kimono barely covering up her nipples. Her throne was jet black. Sitting beside her was a woman appearing to be in her early 30s with long flowing spiky silver hair. Her skin was fair, and 2 horns could seen sticking out of her forehead. Her eyes were golden and glowing with power. She was dressed in a purple shirt that made her petite upper body look male. She had on a pair of jean shorts that showed off her amazing legs. Her throne was made of bones. The last of the women appeared to be in her early 20s with long sweeping platinum blonde hair, almost white. Sticking for her head were what looked like huge horns, or ears. Her eyes were pale, and had no pupil. She was dressed in a high-collar Heim-style kimono with commas running down the collar. Her throne was surrounded by carrots. These 14 women are as followed: Shukaku the 1 tails, Matabi the 2 tails, Isam the 3 tails, Sungurin the 4 tails, Kokuo the 5 tails, Seiken the 6 tails, Chome the 7 tails, Gyuki the 8 tails, Kira the 9 tails, Shinju the 10 tails, Miko known as Kami, Sango known as Yami, Sakura known as Shinigami, and Otsutsuki Kagaya mother of Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi and Susanoo and very first wielder of chakra. All of these women were peering into an orb that showed Naruto in his predicament. Shukaku turning to Miko asked, "Why are we looking at the cute mortal?" Miko closing her eyes said, "Because he contains one of the 10 false biju created by the original Madara Uchiha." All eyes widened and Kira asked, "How?" Sakura said, "It was smart enough to run to this dimension and was instantly sealed inside of his ancestor Mito Senju. The other 9 did the same, well except for the false Shinju, it's sealed in the moon and was stopped by that dimension's Kagaya's children." Kagaya blinking asked, "Why would Tsukuyomi Amaterasu and Susanoo bother with mortal matters. Sango said, they aren't your children in this universe dimension. Your children are Otsutsuki Hagoromo, and Otsutsuki Hamura. With the manifestation of your well-being Zetsu. Kira leaning forward asked, which one does he contain? Miko looking at her said, your false Biju. All eyes widened hearing this and Kira growled, as her false Biju were always male and pricks. Senju asked, what are we going to do about this? Sakura said, he's about to die, because his access to the false Biju has been blocked off, thus now is the perfect time to remove it from him and destroy it. Matabi blinking said, but that will kill him. Sango said, normally yes, but we have a plan for that. All of the true Biju and Kagaya all quirked an eyebrow and asked, what is this plan? Miko giggling said, the plan is to fix what has been done to him by the false Biju, his village and his parents, and give him a new family. Senju quirking an eyebrow asked, how are you going to do this? Sango smirking asked, remember that time we collected samples from all of you? All 11 women remembering said time rubbed the spot while Gurren asked, yeah why? Sakura giggling said, well we're going to use those samples to fix him, along with the alien parasite known as the symbiote, the Leviathan, a few monster girls, a few Digimon, a few Pokemon and the DNA of one of the Super Saiyan God Super Saiyans. All 23 eyes widened hearing this and Shukaku quickly asked, what monster girls are you using? Miko said, Jinko, Dragon, Grizzly, Hellhound, Holstor, Manticore and Ryu. Kokuo whistling said, that's an impressive list. Chome asked, what Pokemon are you using? Sango said, Charizard, Nidoqueen, Mewtwo, Tyranitar, Mawile, Lapras, Luxray, Lucario, Frostlass, Serperior, Haxorus, and Scyther. Kira whistling said, every type. Senju asked, Digimon? Sakura said, Agumon, Gabumon, Vemon, Wormon, Gimmon, Flamemon and Strabimon. Yuki hearing this clicked her teeth and said, he's gonna be a monster. Isam sighing asked, which Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan? Miko smiling said, Vegeta. All 11 females shivered as Vegeta was ruthless. Kagaya asked, who is going to be his new family? Sango looking at her with deadpan eyes said, you are becoming his mother, and your 3 daughters will be his sisters. Kagaya nearly fell out of her chair hearing this. Kira was about to ask another question when Sakura stood up said, we act now. All 3 goddesses then vanished. Kagaya getting back in her chair sighed and said, I don't know if I can handle raising another child. Senju snickering said, you only had to raise 3, I had to raise 9 strong hot-headed and at times bloodthirsty girls. One more will not kill you. All of the other tailed beast with twitching eyebrows glared at their mother and asked, who you calling hot-headed? Senju now laughing said, see my point. Miko, Sango and Sakura appearing in the forest snapped their fingers and made a monstrous storm appear and blanket the forest of death and Konoha. They directly above Naruto's location looked down and created a clear bubble of pure energy. Sango once the barrier was up lowered down until she could see the trees on Naruto's body. Smiling she pulled out 11 jars and said, show time. She then opened the jars and watched as they blended with the rain, and started to filter through the trees to Naruto's body. Sango appearing beside her was holding the smoking rotting carcass of the Leviathan. She watching as this also blended with the rain in the bubble could feel it blending with Naruto's body and the samples from the tailed beast. Miko appearing held up her hands and the rain got heavier, as now symbiotes were falling with the rain and landing on Naruto and the items inside of the bubble. This included several species of animal, not excluding several species of spider. Sango vanishing for seconds appeared with the 7 monster girls and dropped the females. She ignored when the symbiote consumed the females and drained into Naruto. Sakura appearing with the Pokemon tossed them down and ignored when the same thing happened to them. Miko appearing with the Digimon dropped them and watched as they turned into eggs and absorbed by the symbiote. Senju appearing with several jars of pure energy and a single jar full of a few strands of black, yellow, and blue hair. The last jar actually had an ape's tail. She then dropped all the jars and watched as the symbiote absorbed them. All three women then leaned forward to look at Naruto's body. Senju smiled softly, spotting the symbiote slowly covering him. Sakura smiled as his eyes were blank, literally being white. Miko smiled as she could already feel his power increasing by leaps and bounds. Senju leaning back said, "Now time for some presents." Sakura nodding stepped forward and pulled out a set of clothing for either gender. She then added to this in matter converter on each set of gloves and added some nanotechnology to the entire outfit. Miko stepping forward literally pulled the air together to create a chakra, ki, aura, mana-powered galil. She then added a automatic targeting system to the weapon. Senju now opened her mouth to reveal her deadly-looking teeth. She grabbing one of her fangs ripped it out and ignoring the blood pouring from her mouth transformed into a mighty demonic sword. She then coating the blade in pure hellfire, watched as it became a pitch black. Laughing she put the sword in a sheath. All three females sealing said items on Naruto, removed the false Kyuubi and glared at the terrified fox. Senju then gaining a demonic smirk said, "You're dead, you little shit." All three females then vanished, just as Naruto was completely covered by the symbiote. For 2 hours nothing happened, except for the storm, until suddenly all of the symbiotes stared to withdraw from their temporary host and headed directly for Naruto's location. When all of the symbiote had managed to squeeze into the location, a massive power then appeared and the trees started to shake. The trees then exploded and smoke filled the air. All 14 women were still watching, with Kagaya broadcasting this to her daughters. When the smoke cleared, all 17 females gained wide eyes and Senju spit out the sake she had been drinking. Towering in the spot where Naruto had been was a dark pink symbiote with a large black spider on the chest and moving towards just below above the waist. This creature monstrosity had glowing pink eyes with black marks extending from the eyes to further up the head. The mouth was full of sharp and deadly teeth that would make a shark actually whimper in fear. The long sickly green tongue this beast had could be seen inside of the mouth. It had huge powerful arms that would make the trees jealous. Each of its fingers were topped off by deadly-looking claws, that looked like they could rip through flesh, bone, stone, hell, just about everything with ease. Sakura then noticing something off, gained wide eyes when an extra pair of arms burst from the side and these were white and black. Senju knowing this symbiote said, "Anti-venom." The creature lifting up its massive arms roared and Miko felt her jaw scrape the ground when down the creature's back spikes appeared. The next and last thing to happen was for the eyes to actually gain a pupil. These pupils were the same color green as the tongue. This beast now finished its transformation, looked at the bubble that was still up and to the shock of the females watching broke it with a single leap. It now free from the bubble let the heavy rain it had been trapped in spread throughout the forest. It landing high into a tree let its long tongue come out as it said, "We are Bane." It then roared again, this time making sure everyone heard him. Kagaya turning to look at Miko asked, "Why did he name himself Bane?" Senju said, "He didn't. The symbiote did." Kira blinking asked, "What do you mean?" Sakura said, "She means that Naruto-san is still unconscious and bonding with his new power." The symbiote that had already bonded with him realized this, and I assume after tapping into his memories and feelings summoned all of the other symbiotes that had been in the bubble and formed this superorganism known as Bane. Everyone except Miko and Senju blinked. Yuki asked, "What do you mean superorganism?" Miko sighing said, "We had stopped the symbiote rain and had made it only rain regular water. It bursting the barrier made it once again start to rain symbiote, but this time all over the forest of death." 14 pairs of eyes widened hearing this and Shukaku asked, "Why in the 9 hells did it do that?" Kagaya actually figuring out said, "So it could gather more power for its host." The symbiote falling from the sky are most likely touching genin, trees, weapons, hell, everything in the forest. It has already demonstrated the ability to absorb many symbiote and call them to it. The other eyes widened and Chome said, "Genius." Miko nodding said, "Exactly. The more power it gathers, the more powerful Naruto becomes." Matabi said, "Well then this is going to be interesting." It had been 2 entire days and the rain had not let up. In fact it seemed heavier and had spread out beyond the forest of death, as it was now blanketing the village hidden in the leaves. The rain hitting the forest was still infested with symbiote, while the rain hitting the village hidden in the leaves was normal. Sakura in the middle of said forest looking after the twitching and screaming Sasuke looked outside of the hollow-out tree she had found. It was still raining and had been doing so since they had left Naruto Baka to fight Orochimaru. She didn't care that she had just abandoned a teammate to the hands of an S-rank ninja, she only cared about her Sasuke-kun. Besides, when the Baka caught up to them, she would just bat her eyelashes at him and everything would be fine. Well, maybe not fine as she and Sasuke did steal his sword, but the Baka probably couldn't use it anyway and he'd get over it being destroyed by Orochimaru who bit Sasuke on the neck. She turning back to said person put the wet cloth on his forehead and said, "Don't you worry Sasuke-kun, I'm right here." Sasuke's response was to roll over and mumble. Suddenly Sakura detected movement out of the corner of her eyes. She quickly turning and tossing a kunai blinked when it just barely missed a squirrel that seemed to be in pain. She narrowed her eyes spotting the exploding tag on its back. She pulling out another kunai said, "Come out, I know you're there." Chuckling could be heard and the sound genin appeared. She standing up asked, "What do you want?" Dosu looking calm said, "Give us the Uchiha and we won't kill you." Sakura now scowling said, "Never." Zaku snorting said, "As if you actually have a choice, bitch." Sakura tossing a kunai at him watched as he deflected it easily and took a step forward. This triggered her traps and the sound trio easily dodged or countered them. Kin snorting said, "The little bitch thinks she's a real kunoichi. I say we show her better." It didn't take long for Sakura to be beaten and Zaku was about to kill Sasuke when none other than Rock Lee appeared with the squirrel on his shoulder. He then engaged the sound genin in battle, and was doing rather well, until he was hit by the sound waves of Dosu. Next to show up was Team 10 who tried to help out, but they were also easily defeated. Then finally Neji and Ten arrived. Zaku groaning said, "Damn, these Konoha brats are like roaches." Neji was about to reply, when a evil tainted chakra appeared. Sasuke walking into the ever-present rain looked at the bloody Sakura and to her shock snorted. He turning to look at Zaku asked, "Did you hurt the stupid bitch?" Zaku quirking an eyebrow said, "Yeah, that was me." Sasuke nodding said, "Thanks, that saves me the trouble later, but I'm afraid I'm gonna have to kill you." He then to the shock and horror of the genin, except for Neji brutally murdered Zaku and Dosu. He then attacked and defeated the male genin leaving all of the female genin. He then turning to look at them said, "All 4 of you useless whores will be spreading your legs for me." He then setting his demented eyes on Sakura said, "Starting with my pathetic and useless teammate." Sakura with wide eyes backed up and said, "Stop kidding around Sasuke-kun." He snorting appeared in front of her and grabbed her by her hair. He then drug her into the hollowed-out tree and proceeded to beat and rape her, multiple times. Meanwhile Bane dominating a battle with a pathetic group of AIM genin, stabbed his hands through the last remaining members of said group and collected the symbiote that had fallen on them. He tilting his massive head picked up the scroll they had and smirked as he had collected not only a lot of power for his host, but had gathered more than enough scrolls. It then deciding to find its host treacherous teammates closed its eyes and sent out a pulse. This pulse spread throughout the forest of death and hit everything with a symbiote. It then getting a pulse back opened its eyes as it had found its teammates. Apparently the Uchiha had given into the power of that stupid Hiki of Doom. Its host had destroyed that thing without even thinking and had gathered the power from it. It realizing that the Uchiha was about to move onto the Yamanaka girl, jumped high into the air, breaking through the tree line and into the sky. It adjusting in midair aimed directly for the clearing where all of this was happening. It breaking through the tree line again was approaching the ground rapidly. Sasuke, inches away from grabbing Ino, suddenly felt a monstrous chakra presence above his position. He with wide eyes jumped back just as Bane landed. Bane's landing kicked up debris and a smoke screen. Sasuke, snarling, wondered who dared interrupt his great plan. A figure slowly started to become clear in the smoke, and Ino was praying to Kami that it was someone to save her from Sasuke, the rapist, Uchiha. When the smoke cleared, Sasuke took several steps back in fear. Ino turned so white Snow would be asking for tips. Kin pissed her pants and Ten gulped loudly. Bane, standing in the hole it had created, set its eyes on Sasuke. It, letting its long tongue come out, said, "Uchiha." Sasuke, shaking his fear away, snarled and said, "I don't know what you are, but get out of my way before I make you." Bane, hearing this pitiful threat, laughed. This made Sasuke angry, so he rushed Bane. He, landing a punch, gained wide eyes when Bane didn't budge. He, jumping back, started to throw everything he had at Bane, who just continued to laugh. He even sent a fire jutsu at Bane, but it did nothing. Bane, still laughing, said, "We are Bane." Bane then blurred forward and slammed its fist into Sasuke's stomach. Not only did Sasuke lift up from the ground from the sheer force behind the punch, but the curse mark receded and he puked up pure blood. Bane then punched Sasuke again, sending him crashing into a tree and not only breaking the boy's back, but knocking the boy out. Bane, spotting this, said, "Pathetic Uchiha, Bane is ashamed to have used so much of its power." It then, looking around the clearing, could see the wide eyes and the fear. It, walking over to Ino, said, "No fear, Bane, Yamanaka. Bane save you from Uchiha, stop rain." Ino, blinking, didn't remember telling this beast her name. She then actually realized that it had indeed stopped raining. Looking up, she was shocked as the skies was finally clear. She, turning to look at Bane, asked, "How did you?" Bane, tilting his head, said, "We create rain, it helped gather power and knowledge for Host." Ino wasn't the only one to hear Host, and Ten asked, "What do you mean, Host?" Bane, turning to her, remembered her from Naruto's memories and said, "Steel Panda-chan, we mean what we said." Ten, blinking, turned brick red and asked, "How the nine hells do you know that name?" Bane, tilting its head, said, "Our Host used to call you that when you were still friends. Before you started chasing after the heart of stick up the Hyuga." Ten, hearing this, blinked and started to try and remember anyone calling her that. She was drawing up blanks until Ino asked, "How do you know my name, Bane-san?" Bane, turning to her, said, "Bane knows everything about you, Yamanaka-san. Bane knows that you love the purple flowers that can only be found by the lakes in the fall. Bane knows that your favorite food is red bean soup and sweet dango. Bane knows that you love the rain, and when it rains you dance in said rain. Bane knows you were one of our Host's first true friends. Bane knows that when you were 9 you got lost in one of the forests surrounding Konoha, so Bane's Host tracked you down and brought you back to the village. Bane knows your favorite type of song is love song and favorite genre is pop. Bane knows you love the Princess Gale movies." Bane, ignoring Ino's widening eyes, finished with, "Bane also knows that you are the one who bought our Host first pair of goggles, that Host keep hidden in a secret compartment, along with stuffed panda bear with a steel ribbon, cracked and burnt out wooden pipe, picture of pretty ramen waitress and her father, a glass dolphin, and wooden practice sword. Oh, and stuffed Snow White bunny." Ino's eyes were wide as she had figured out who Bane's Host was. Ten, after hearing ramen and stuffed panda bear, knew who it was and had shock reflected in her eyes. Kin was just confused. Ino, with trembling hands, reached up and touched Bane's face. She, looking at his green pupils, asked, "Naruto-kun?" Bane, looking her in the eyes, said, "Bane's Host cannot respond as he is unconscious." "He did hear you though." Ino and Ten, hearing this, asked, "Why is he unconscious? What happened to him and how did he become your Host?" Bane, turning to look at the unconscious Uchiha, said, "Orochimaru of the Sannin attack, Host fight, traitorous teammates abandon and take sword. Host beaten like a old dirty rug, have chakra and former tenant sealed off, evil hickey of doom placed, then buried under many trees." Eyes widened hearing this, and Kin asked, "You survived the curse seal?" Bane looking at her said, Host did not survive. Divine intervention saved Host and removed Fox. We also because of divine intervention. Ino with wide eyes asked, how divine? Bane turning back to Ino said, Kami, Yami and Shinigami. All three females and the recovering male ninja nearly choked on their saliva. Ten hearing this asked, how close was Naruto to dying? Bane looking her dead in the eyes said, Host was crossing into the afterlife, when Host was saved. Host was legally dead for 50 minutes. All eyes widened hearing this and Ino with trembling hands and tears gathering in the corner of her eyes asked, is he all right now? Bane turning to her said, Host still absorbing power, and recovering from death experience. It then remembering that all of its symbiote rain still need to be absorbed said, that remind Bane, need to absorb rest of symbiote finish process. It then walking over to its hole stood to its max height which was gigantic. It then let loose a bone-chilling roar. Everyone gained wide eyes when black stuff literally started to come from everywhere, including parts of their bodies and went into Bane. This made Bane double in size, muscle. Bane now looking like someone's worst nightmare, had a lot of info and was shocked at how much power it had gained. Ino ignoring this power-up walked over to Bane and asked, how long before Naruto wakes up? Bane looking at her said, hard to say. Host has a lot to absorb and sift through. Ino hearing this asked, then how is he going to complete the exams? Bane blinking said, Bane complete exams for Host. Shikamaru hating to do so got up and said, I hate to break it to you but you're a hulking monster that wouldn't be able to fit inside of the tower doors. Bane looking at Shikamaru said, lazy Nara, underestimate Bane's intelligence. Bane much smarter than we look. Shikamaru with a twitching eyebrow said, please show me. Bane nodding shocked everyone when it not only shrunk down to Naruto's height, but lost all of the monstrous features. It even dropped a pair of arms. It then taking the transformation further made the symbiote vanish to reveal an exact duplicate of Naruto. Kin with wide eyes asked, how in the 9 hells did you do that? Bane turning to look at her said, we are much more intelligent than humans give credit for. We can take many forms and shapes, but prefer natural form. We also bonded with Host on not only genetic level, but with Host very soul. Eyes widened hearing this and Ten asked, do you think you can stop saying we? Bane scratching his cheeks said, I mean I can try. Ino sighing said, good enough, at least until Naruto wakes up. Neji snorting said, Ten we're leaving. Ten sighing looked at Bane and said, I have to go, but make sure Naruto knows we need to talk when he wakes up. Bane nodding said, Host heard. She nodding then followed her 2 teammates. Shikamaru sighing said, come on Ino, we're heading for the tower to finish this troublesome exam. Ino nodding turned to Bane and said, we also need to talk Naruto. She then left with her team. Bane once they were gone turned to Kin and asked, what do I do with you? Kin blanching dropped to her knees and said, please don't kill me Bane-sama. I have information you may find useful and I'll even be Naruto's slave. Bane blinking said, I accept. Now give me information. Kin nodding quickly told Bane what she knew. Bane snorting said, old man Hokage needs to hear this info. Bane turning to look at Sasuke shot webs at the boy and created several clones to carry the boy in the net of webs he had just made. He then turning to the hollowed out tree could hear whimpering and crying from inside of it. He rolling his eyes walked inside of the tree and sprayed the crying Sakura with webbing, clothing the pathetic girl in one go. He then turning to Kin said, you carry her, I will lead the way to the tower. Kin nodding walked inside of the tree and grabbed the still crying Sakura. She walking out of the tree watched as Bane easily jumped through the trees. She jumping onto a tree branch followed her new master. Bane very near the tower suddenly stopped sensing a presence below. It looking down blinked spotting the Kabuto boy from before. Kin appearing beside her new master looked down and knowing who Kabuto really was informed her master of said news. Bane hearing this allowed his symbiote form to appear and dropped down. Kabuto, turning around, gained wide eyes, spotting the monster before him. Bane didn't even give Kabuto the chance to speak. He summoned tendrils and had them wrap the boy up tightly. Kabuto was then dragged kicking and screaming into the symbiote. Bane, absorbing Kabuto's life force, along with everything he knew, spat out the glasses. He then, jumping back into the trees, ignored the fact that his clones had reached the tower and were waiting. He, nodding to Kin, said, "You already proving self." He then continued on his way, with a blushing and beaming Kin right behind him. Landing near his clones, he walked up the tower and punched the doors in, not only breaking them from their hinges, but shattering them. He, ignoring this, walked into the room with his clones carrying the still unconscious Uchiha and Kin, who was still carrying the crying Sakura. Bane, looking at the words, understood them, as his host had actually been hiding behind a mask, not literal like the people its ancestors did, but physiologically. It pulling out the several scrolls it had procured in its quest for power and information for its host, laid them all out in a X-shaped pattern. It, watching as smoke started billowing out of it, jumped back and assumed its symbiote form in a protective manner in front of Kin. When the smoke cleared, Bane blinked, spotting all of the sensei in the room including Dolphin-san. Iruka, blinking at all of the sensei, gained wide eyes, spotting Bane, along with the clones of Bane carrying Sasuke. He and the other sensei instantly got ready for battle, until Bane dropped his symbiote form and said, "Dolphin-sensei. I have never been so glad to see you." Iruka's jaw actually touched the ground when the monster shifted into his favorite knuckle-headed student. He, shaking his head, asked, "Naruto, what the hell was that thing? Why is Sasuke tied up and unconscious? Where's Sakura, and how did you get so many scrolls?" Bane, laughing and ignoring that it still sounded too powerful, said, "That thing has a name, Dolphin-sensei. Its name is Bane, and she has feelings, you know. She is also my ultimate defense, as she is a living, breathing being. Uchiha Tem is tied up because he betrayed me and left me at the hands of the old man's treacherous snake of a student. Said snake gave both of us an evil hickey of doom. Tem gave into his, I destroyed mine. I had to render him unconscious as he was about to rape and beat Yamanaka-san. The other traitor is being carried by new slave, Golden Earth. Uchiha Tem raped and beat her first, before I could arrive. I gained so many scrolls by slaughtering the pathetic ninja they belong to." Iruka, hearing this, blinked and then asked, "Do you need to speak to Hokage-sama?" Bane, nodding, said, "Yes, I need to speak to the old man." Bane, then feeling its host finishing its changes and absorbing all it had gathered. It, gaining wide eyes, said, "I can wait to see the old man until later though. Need to rest." Iruka, blinking, said, "Okay. Lucky for you, you still had 2 days to finish the exams." He, then taking Sasuke from the clones, said, "I will take Sasuke, and your slave, as you said, can follow me until you go meet the Hokage." Bane, turning to Kin, said, "Take traitor to the infirmary and come ask Dolphin-sensei to take you to my room." Kin, nodding, said, "Hi Naruto-sama." Bane, hearing this, took off running down the hall to find an empty room. It, finding one, quickly opened the door. It, locking it, climbed into the bed. It, closing its eyes, slowly started to let its form fade, to reveal the host. The first thing that became visible was shoulder-length teal hair that had more spikes than a porcupine has quills. One bang fell over the face of the person. Said face was feminine and perfect, as not even a mark could be seen. The lips of the host were plump and kissable. The ears of this being were slightly pointed and elven in nature. The neck of the host was lean and strong. This neck led to a very impressive set of DD cup. The arms of the host were lean, powerful, yet still feminine in nature. The hands were flawless and elegant. The stomach of this being was toned and tight, and revealed that the host was not a slacker. The host had a slim female waist, that led to long gorgeous legs, that like the arms were strong and powerful. The feet were the same state as the hands. Sitting at the junction of the thighs was 2 things. Hanging down was a 10-inch long, 3-inch wide. This was hanging over a virginal vagina. This host was stark and had its eyes closed. It slowly opened its eyes to reveal purple eyes with 3 black rings surrounding in round pupil. This being getting up off of the bed walked into the bathroom that was joined to the room Bane had chosen. Looking in the mirror, the host said, "It seems as all of those upgrades changed me more than they thought." She then shaking her head said, "I will need a new name." She closing her eyes and letting Bane create clothing for her. She opening her eyes smiled as she was now wearing a simple black shirt with the kanji for demon in red on the front. Going with this shirt was a pair of red skinny jeans, that had her Konoha headband as her belt. On her feet tennis shoes could be seen. They were of course black and white Jordans with spiders instead of checks. She lifting up her hands smiled as she had metal plaited fingerless gloves on that stopped at her wrist to continue to white bandages that went up to just above her elbow. Nodding to herself she walked out of the bathroom and sat back down on the bed. Closing her eyes she decided to review her skills as Naruto. It didn't take her long to realize that her mask had been too weak and too much of an idiot. She sighing wondered how she was going to explain her new form. She then opened her eyes as someone was knocking on the door. Getting up she unlocked it. Opening it she smiled spotting not only Kin, but the old man. Sarutobi blinking asked, "I'm sorry, I must have knocked on the wrong door." The girl shaking her head said, "No you did not, Gigi." Sarutobi narrowing his eyes asked, "Who are you?" The girl sighing said, "I haven't really given myself a new name as my current look wasn't expected." She then looking at Kin smiled and said, "Your first names means gold." Kin blinking asked, "Who are you and what have you done with Naruto-sama?" She said, "If you'd both come in I would be glad to explain." Sarutobi nodding was ready to kill this girl if he needed to, while Kin was worried about Naruto-sama. Once both people were in the room she sat down on the bed and said, "First of all, I don't want anything I tell you leaving this room until I'm ready. Second, the secret to defeating the paperwork is shadow clones. Third, I will need a new name. Finally, don't freak out." She then taking a deep breath in explained everything. When she finished Sarutobi with wide eyes asked, "Are you serious?" The girl nodding let the second version of Bane appear and said, "I am." Kin with wide eyes asked, "Why can't you be Naruto-sama anymore?" The girl looking at Kin said, "Because I'm not a man." Sarutobi sighing pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "Your name can be Naruko." He then realizing that Naruto's own teammates had abandoned him, became furious. He growling said, "Those 2 traitors are dead. I'll execute them in front of all of the genin." Naruko said, "You'll get no arguments from me, old man." Kin nodding said, "Anyone who betrays Naruko-sama must die." Naruko hearing this giggled before she could stop herself from doing so. She then realizing that she giggled like a girl, slapped her hands over her mouth. Sarutobi chuckling said, "I'll be leaving now as I have some things to take care of." Kin-san, do help your Naruko-sama adjust to being female. Kin nodding said, "I will do so, Hokage-sama." Naruko on the other hand sent a glare at the old man knowing that he was enjoying this too much. The next day, Naruko sitting on her bed was ignoring Kin trying and failing to give her the female version of the talk. Both females blinked when there was a knock on the door. Kin walking over to said thing opened it to reveal Ino, 1010, the old man, Sakura and for some reason Sakura's parents. Kin blinking asked, "May I help you?" Ino putting her hand on her hips said, "I talked to Hokage-sama and he said that Naruto's in this room." 1010 coughing said, "We still need to talk to him." Kin nodding to this looked at Sarutobi who said, "I came to inform him of the verdict. The Harunos are here to apologize for their daughter's actions." Kin blinking asked, "What about the traitor?" Sakura bowing said, "I am here to speak with him." Kin turning to look at Naruko who shrugged bowed and said, "You may enter." The people entered the room and those who didn't know blinked wondering where was Naruto, and who the girl sitting on the bed was. Sarutobi chuckling at the confused looks said, "Allow me to introduce Naruko Uzumaki, formerly known as Naruto Uzumaki." Eyes widened hearing this and Ino asked, What the hell happened? Naruko, scratching the back of her head, said, "A lot." Sarutobi chuckled hearing this vague answer and said, "Sasuke Uchiha was executed 2 hours ago. Sakura Haruno has been removed from the ninja program until you see fit." Naruko, nodding, turned to Sakura's parents, who bowed very low and said, "We humbly apologize for our daughter's treacherous actions. We from here on will pay for anything you need." Naruko, nodding, turned to Sakura, who dropped to both knees and pressed her forehead to the floor. She, with her eyes shut, said, "Please forgive me for what I have done. I am a selfish coward who deserves to be hung for what I did in the forest. I swear my loyalty to you from this day forward. Your wish is my command." Naruko, blinking, said, "You're forgiven now, go home and get some rest." Sakura, crying, said, "Thank you, Naruko-sama." She and her parents then left. Naruko, turning to look at Ino and Tenten, asked, "Now what is it that you two needed to talk to me about?" Ino, recovering from her shock, was about to answer when Kin finally realized that Naruko's hair was very long. She, gasping, said, "Naruko-sama, I need to fix your hair." Naruko, blinking, asked, "Do you want to fix my hair?" Kin, nodding, said, "Yes, Naruko-sama, as if you keep your hair like that and it cost you in a battle, I would never be able to forgive myself." Naruko, sighing, said, "Fine then, fix it." Kin, beaming, walked over to Naruko and started to fix her hair. Ino, shaking her head, placed her hands on her hips and said, "You have a lot of explaining to do, and you're going to answer my questions or else." Naruko, stopping Bane from responding to the vague threat Ino had just given, said, "I'll tell you what I want to tell and no more." Ino, hearing this, nodded, while Tenten simply sat down. Naruko, scratching her face once more, said, "I think I'll start with the biggest secret I learned when I became a genin." She, lifting up her shirt, revealed her tight and toned stomach. She, channeling chakra, made the seal appear and said, "This seal used to contain the very beast that attacked the village 12, almost 13 years ago. That's right, this seal used to contain that mangy mud known as the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Now it's just a temporary focus point to the new energies I now have swirling inside of me. It also has all of the power from the evil Hiki of Doom that pale snake-faced bastard gave me. Said power is being slowly transformed into other energies, to help my system." She then, putting down her shirt, summoned a little bit of the symbiote and said, "This is a symbiote and it comes from a race of amorphous extraterrestrial parasites that envelop their hosts like costumes, creating a symbiotic bond through which the host's mind can be influenced." The people still in the room gasped, including Sarutobi, who was still in the room. Ino, raising her hand, asked, "Is Bane-san a symbiote?" Naruko, nodding, summoned her second Bane outfit and said, "Allow me to tell you their history. The Clintar, better known as the symbiotes, are a species of amorphous symbiotic extraterrestrials from the Andromeda galaxy. In their natural state, the Clintar were benevolent, and endeavored to create an intergalactic peacekeeping society by using the symbiosis they need to subsist in order to transform worthy hosts into the ultimate noble warriors. However, to achieve this perfect symbiosis, the host must have a perfect blend of moral and physical ideals. If not, the resulting symbiosis would corrupt both the Clintar and its host. Symbiotes are fully aware and sentient creatures, but when corrupted are also vicious and wild, compelling their hosts to violence." She then, stopping to make sure they were listening, picked back up with, "At some point in the distant past, these corrupted Clintar established a brutal spacefaring empire dedicated to infecting and overtaking entire planets, spreading misinformation about their benevolent counterparts. As a result, the species as a whole developed the reputation of being amorphous predatory monsters that dominate their host mentally and physically while parasitically feeding off their emotions and bodies. The corrupted Clintar tend to force their hosts to perform spectacular and terrifying feats in order to feed off of the resulting rush of adrenaline, and possibly other hormones, such as phenethylamine. Eventually, these host beings would be dry, exhausted by the constant stress and exertion, or simply die in a failed stunt, whereupon the symbiote would seek out a new host and repeat the process." All eyes were even wider hearing this. Sarutobi, shaking his head, asked, "Is Bane Naruko shaking her head said, Bane-chan is like most of her ancestors. Let me tell you about them. She then allowing Bane to retreat said, the first to come in contact with humans was named Venom. His host was named Eddie Brock and together they walked along the gray area, doing both good deeds and evil things. This is where the ability to mimic other clothes came from, along with a pocket dimension of its own allowing it to store items. She allowing Bane to resemble the Venom suit said, Venom would later spawn creating a child, this child was left behind in a prison. It would then bond with a serial killer known as Cletus Cassidy creating a very lethal being known as Carnage who would be the first to demonstrate the ability to turn appendages into weapons. It would also be more dense than Venom and allow for more hits. She allowing Bane to take the form of Carnage then explained the many other examples of symbiote genetics and even explained the weaknesses of the symbiote. Kin having braided Naruko's hair asked, but Naruko-sama the now dead traitor hit you with a fireball jutsu, shouldn't that have weakened Bane-san? Naruko laughing said, it would have if Bane had been a normal symbiote. You see Bane is a super organism who had her genetics altered by the blood of Yami-sama, along with every power-up given to me. Bane now has several abilities that may never show up in another symbiote again. She then said, like for instance the rain that fell over the forest of death. Ino blinking asked, what about it? Naruko said, it is a move created by Bane, well not really by Bane, as Kami-sama, Yami-sama and Shinigami-sama created the basic version of it. Bane just expanded upon the idea making it better and creating the first symbiote release jutsu. Everyone blinked and Sarutobi asked, what is this jutsu called and what are its uses? She looking at him said, symbiote rain and it creates a heavy downpour of what appears to be rain. In reality it's droplets of water infected with spawn of Bane, who unlike the ones before her can spawn as many times as she wants. This allows Bane to not only gain a perfect view of everything within the range of the jutsu, but plants symbiotes on everything within range of the jutsu. Everyone hearing this gained wide eyes and Sarutobi having figured out the uses on his own after hearing about the symbiote let his pipe hit the floor as he said, this jutsu allows you to not only absorb power, but gives you whatever the person infected by the spawn knows, when you call them back. Naruko nodding said, exactly. Kin with wide eyes asked, does that mean that? Naruko nodding said, yes Kin-chan I can absorb bloodlines in this way. Ino with her jaw scraping the ground said, holy shit. Naruko nodding said, now allow me to explain a little more. She then explained what she wanted and by the time she was finished, Sarutobi had sent an Anbu to tell everyone bets were allowed in the prelims and finals. He starting to chuckle said, I'm going to be filthy stinking rich. Naruko looking at him said, you mean we're going to be filthy stinking rich? Because if you think for a second I'm letting you bet on me without getting a cut you've gone senile. Sarutobi with a twitching eyebrow said, annoying brat. Naruko giving him a blank stare said, senile old man. He shaking his head asked, you do realize this means? Naruko nodding said, yes so invite the councils to watch the prelims so I can demonstrate my bloodlines. Also I need someone who knows how to unseal objects. Sarutobi blinking asked, why? She telling him to come closer whispered why into his ears. He laughing said, I'll find Kakashi and tell him you need his help. He standing up said, now if you'd excuse me I have some business to attend to. He then left the room. Ino and Tenten standing upside and said, we need to get back to our teams, but this conversation is not over. Both females then left the room, leaving just Naruko and Kin. Kin curious asked, so why do you need someone who can unseal things Naruko-sama? Naruko leaning back on the bed said, because I'm stark right now, as Bane is acting as clothing to save my modesty. Kin hearing this gained wide eyes and stood stock still. Naruko spotting this smirked and said, priceless. The next day Naruko yawning was standing with the other contestants in her actually clothes, with the exception being that she had Bane add onto the gloves Sengo had given her. The gloves now had fingers and these fingers had thick and deadly claws on them. She also had the hilt of her new sword sitting on her left hip, but didn't have plans on using it. Standing behind her was Kakashi, who she could tell was already bored. She couldn't blame him as the old man was going on and on about dull things. Naruko could even feel Bane starting to get bored, and no matter how tame, a bored symbiote is a bad idea. She coughing made all eyes move to her. She looking Sarutobi in the eyes said, "Old man, get to the part about the genin having to participate in preliminary battles because of the insane amount of genin still in here, before I alert the kunoichi to just who their Hokage is, and what type of book he reads around impressionable young minds." Sarutobi hearing this threat turned so white a ghost would be asking for tips and quickly introduced Hayate, who coughing asked anyone who wanted to quit to do so. Naruko noticed how a lot of eyes moved to her. She rolling her eyes said, "I'm not going to quit and I never will, so you can stop looking at me like that." Everyone moving their eyes back to Hayate, who nodding drew the attention to the board. It rolling through names stopped on Konkuro of Suna versus Neji Hyuga of Konoha. Neji snorting said, "Fate has declared me the winner of this match." Naruko rolling her eyes said, "Fate has declared you a dumbass." All eyes moved to her and Neji sent her a wilting glare. She looking at him said, "That pitiful look doesn't work on me. You've got that damn stick so far up your every time you speak little pieces of wood flies out as spittle." Neji now pissed was sending killing intent at her. She giving him the bird said, "Your killing intent doesn't work either, Fate boy, as I felt more killing intent from a bunch of drunk civilians, plus that little bit of hatred is nothing compared to that of the likes of Zabuza Momochi, God rest his soul, and that pale snake-faced bastard I fought in the forest of death. Compared to them, your killing intent is a glass of water." Neji now furious turned to the snickering Konkuro and said, "You will pay for her insolence." Naruko snorting again followed the eye-smiling Kakashi up the stairs and ignored the glare sent at her by 1010. Leaning on the railing she could tell that the councils were there watching, and when Neji landed a killing blow to a puppet could literally feel the smugness rolling off of the Hyuga clan. Shaking her head as Bane wanted to slaughter said clan, she used her webbing and snatched Asuma's cigarettes from him. Asuma glaring at her said, "Give me back my precious cigarettes." Naruko ignoring him used her webbing again to snatch the lollipop from the white-haired Kumo boy. Omoi glaring at her said, "Give me back Lolly-chan." Naruko ignored him and this time snatched the little orange book out of Sarutobi's robes. She blinked finding a first edition copy of that smut so many read in her hands. She snorting tossed the book back to Sarutobi and said, "Stupid smut." She then looking at the other things she had snatched snorted spotting the cigarettes. She crushed the pack making Asuma blanch. She then said, "Stupid cancer sticks." She spotting the lollipop, picked it up. She looking at Omoi who looked horrified, tossed it back at him and said, "Here you go." Omoi catching it nuzzled it and said, "It's okay Lolly-chan, daddy is here." Naruko's sweat dropped hearing this just as Neji defeated the real Konkuro and sent a glare at her. She snorting gave him the finger and said, "Stop glaring at me Tem before I slap you so hard you fast forward 3 years." Everyone including the one tails inside of Gaara knew that was one hell of a slap. Neji now pissed beyond reason stomped up the stairs and joined his team. Naruko watching the board yawned as the next match was Kiba Inuzuka of Konoha vs Karui of Kumo. She blinked when Kiba said, "Aw man, I have to fight a cardboard box. Damn, I was hoping to face the blonde with the big boobs and impress her with my might. I guess I'll just have to impress her by defeating that ironing board down on the arena." Naruko hearing this turned to Kakashi and said, "She's gonna either kill him or permanently cripple him for what he just said, and even if he does manage to win, and that's a huge if, Kurenai-sensei is going to beat him like a rug, followed by his sister and finally his mother for the asinine thing he just said." Kakashi nodding said, "He's in trouble either way, and if I were in his shoes I'd be hoping she killed me." It did not take long for Karui to stomp a deep mudhole into Kiba, and break every single bone in his body. She then snapped his in half making him scream loudly. Naruko shivering asked, can someone say malatality? Every male in the room closed their legs, this including Gaara. Hayate being more green than normal coughed and got Kiba some help. The board then scrolled through names again landing on Ino versus Omoi. Ino lost badly, as Omoi defeated her in one move. Naruko sighing said, that was utterly pathetic. It's her own fault too as she was too busy being a fangirl of the traitor. She then shrugging said, oh well. Next up was Hinata versus Temari. Hinata gave a good fight, but ended up being defeated by Temari. Naruko, now bored once again, was wondering when it would be her turn to fight. Several more battles later it was finally Naruko's turn. She looking at the screen could see that her battle was actually a triple battle. It was her versus Shino versus Samui of Kumo. Samui was the blonde Kiba had been talking about. Naruko smiling jumped down to the arena ready to fight. Shino sighing pushed up his shades and nodded when Kurenai wished him good luck. Samui walking down the steps was wondering who to take out first, already making her first mistake. Once all three genin were down on the battlefield, Hayate coughed and asked if they were ready. Shino simply nodded. Samui sighing looked at Naruko and said, I am ready. Naruko smiling said, I'm ready. Hayate nodding started the battle. Instantly both Shino and Samui went speeding towards Naruko. She feeling this waited until they were about to hit, when she literally dodged both of their attacks. Shino blinking sent more of his bugs at Naruko, while Samui redirecting actually charged at Shino. Naruko letting Bane appear took care of Shino's bugs and watched as the bug boy was defeated by Samui. Hayate grabbing Shino and moving back watched as Samui said, please give up Uzumaki-san. Naruko curious asked, why? Samui sighing once more said, I have read your files Uzumaki-san. You are the dead last in your class and have a pathetic amount of skill. It's amazing that you're even still alive. Naruko hearing this narrowed her eyes, as not only was she insulted, but Bane was insulted. She then said, you still haven't told me why I should surrender. Samui sighing said, because you cannot hope to defeat me, even in your wildest dreams. If you give up now you'd save yourself from humiliation. Naruko now pissed cracked her knuckles and let Bane fade. She then dropping into her new taijutsu stance said, I'm going to make you eat those words. Samui sighing said, I tried to warn you. She then blurred towards Naruko, who her shock not only dodged her attack but punched her in the stomach. Naruko followed this up with a kick to the chin, sending Samui flying back. Samui stopping her flight looked at Naruko who with a smirk on her face asked, how's that for being a dead last? Samui shaking her head said, you still cannot defeat me Uzumaki-san. Naruko dropping her smirk asked, how about you put your money where your mouth is? Samui quirking an eyebrow asked, what do you mean Uzumaki-san? Naruko gaining her smirk said, since you're so sure I can't defeat you, let's make a bet on it. Samui blinking thought about it for a second and then asked, what are the terms of this bet? Naruko smirking said, if I defeat you, you quit being a Kumo Kunoichi, move to Konoha and become my slave. All eyes widened hearing this. Samui narrowing her eyes asked, when I defeat you? Naruko eye smiling said, I retire from being a Konoha Kunoichi, move to Kumo and become your slave. Oh, and Kumo gets its hands on the Hirishin no Jutsu along with the Rasengan, the Uzumaki chains and the latest bloodline. All eyes widened hearing this. Samui being confident in her skills nodded and said, deal, and I will even add my virginity for you to take at any time you see fit, and I will willingly bear anyone's children you want me to. Naruko smiling now said, deal. Sarutobi having written down the terms asked, what about conditions? Naruko smiling said, Samui has to give everything she's got. Samui blinking said, the same for Naruko. Sarutobi nodding finished the contract and said, that's done. Samui hearing this dropped into her stance and pulled out her weapon, ready to do battle at full power. Naruko dropping into her stance, allowed the initial state of Bane to appear. Samui, ignoring this, grabbed the hilt of her sword and said, I apologize in advance, Uzumaki-san, but I promise you being my slave will not be completely agonizing. Naruko, letting the tendrils of Bane appear, said, I apologize in advance, Samui-chan, but after I kick you, myself and Kin-chan are going to take you home, tie you down and ravage you so much and so hard that not only will heaven be able to hear your cries of pleasure, but the old man and the other people who read that filthy smut will all be passed out with huge nosebleeds. Samui, snorting, said, we will see. She then vanished to the eyes of most genin. Naruko, being able to see her because of Bane absorbing some properties of the dead Sasuke Tem's Sharingan, easily dodged the slash from Samui. Samui was then hit several times in the side by Naruko. She, moving back, rubbed her side and said, impressive reaction time, Uzumaki-san. Naruko, eye smiling, though no one could tell, said, thank you, Samui-chan, but now it's my turn. She then literally vanished, and the next thing anyone knew, Samui crashed into the far wall. Samui had wide eyes, not believing how fast Naruko was, as she hadn't even seen the girl move. She wasn't the only one who had this reaction. Karui, with her jaw scraping the ground, said, holy shit, she's faster than B-sensei. Omoi, for once not on a lollipop, wondered if they had lost Samui. Naruko, appearing, smiled and asked, how was that? Samui, shaking her head, said, I will not lose, Uzumaki-san. Naruko, laughing, said, that's right, give me a good fight. The two fighters then vanished and what sounded like thunder could be heard. Kakashi, standing beside Kin, had his Sharingan out as he was studying the battle, planning on training Naruko for the finals. Kin just had a huge smile on her face knowing that her mistress was going to win. Ino, having recovered from her loss, was watching this battle, wanting to know if Bane was really beneficial to Naruko. Ten, having won her match, was wondering how Naruko was going to do. Shikamaru, having gotten a pass, was watching very carefully just in case he had to battle either of the two down on the field. Choji, munching on his chips, was wondering if Naruko was going to win. Neji, still upset from Naruko's biting comments, was hoping that Naruko lost to Samui so he could rub it in her face that fate had declared her a loser. Anko was staring at Bane with pure unashamed lust. She licked her lips as she had thought Naruko was pretty damn hot without this awesome suit of power. Kurenai was very ashamed to admit that she was turned on by how hot Naruko was. Asuma had dropped his cigarettes from how shocked he was. Hinata, with a heavy blush on her face, couldn't believe her crush was so strong. Shino just shook his head as his bugs were terrified of Naruko, and with good reason. Gaara was standing there with a manic grin on his face. Temari was turned all the way on by what she was seeing, having no clue why. Kankuro had hearts for eyes and was openly drooling at the smoking hot battle. The civilian council saw this as proof that Naruko was a demon and was already making plans to have her killed. The shinobi council, having gotten the message from Sarutobi about the new bloodlines, were thinking. The elders were foaming at the mouth, wanting Naruko under their thumbs. The hidden Orochimaru wondered why his curse seal hadn't activated yet. Karui, watching as Naruko blocked one of Samui's attacks, said, damn it, stop playing around, Samui. Omoi, knowing that Samui was actually going all out, wondered when Naruko would stop toying with Samui. Samui appeared was covered in bruises and blood could be seen at the right corner of her mouth. She was also bent over, panting, as this battle was pushing her. Naruko, standing on the ceiling using the spider abilities instead of her chakra, wondered if this was really all Samui had. Dropping down, she let Bane retreat as she asked, are you really going all out, Samui-chan? Samui, hearing this question, glared at Naruko and said, of course I'm going all out, that was the terms of our wager. Naruko, hearing this, pouted and said, I thought you were just warming up. Eyes widened hearing this, and Samui asked, are you saying that you weren't going all out? Naruko, shaking her head, said, heck no. I'm barely using any of my power. In fact, she, rolling her shoulders, said, I'm not using a single drop of my chakra. Jaws scraped the ground hearing this, and Samui realized that she had better get used to living in Konoha. Naruko, smiling, said, Allow me to introduce my second bloodline. She then tapped into the powers of the Pokemon she absorbed. She closing her eyes liked that because of Bane she could alter her body according to what Pokemon she chose to use. She first picked Charizard, felt large black draconic wings burst from her back. The backs of these wings had several red spiders on them. She then chose Frostlass, and felt the lower half of her body become covered in a kimono. She then picking Luxray felt the tail of said Pokemon grow from her. She then knowing that Samui was from Kumo, picked Tyranitar. She didn't feel any physical changes happen here. Opening her eyes she smiled revealing her very sharp teeth and realized that Tyranitar did indeed give her some physical changes, as she could feel her body bulging with muscles. Samui with wide eyes asked, "What the hell?" Naruko still smirking said, "Behold my second bloodline. I call it Synchronize Release." Samui asked, "What does it do?" Naruko chuckling said, "I'm afraid I can't tell you that at the moment Samui-chan." Samui was about to say something when suddenly a mighty sandstorm appeared, blocking everyone's view. Tamari turning to Gaara thinking this was him gained wide eyes when he said, "Mother doesn't like this." Samui shocked that she was now in a sandstorm wondered what was going on. Naruko literally inches from Samui said, "This is an ability of mine. I can summon a sandstorm without lifting a finger." Samui spinning charged forward trying to take Naruko out. She missed by a mile, as Naruko was now in the air. Naruko chuckling asked, "What's the matter Samui-chan, you don't like my sand?" Samui looking in every direction said, "Stop playing games with me Uzumaki-san." Naruko hearing this laughed and let the sandstorm vanish. All eyes moved up to spot her flying in the air. She looking at Samui said, "As you wish Samui-chan." She then opened her mouth and unleashed a gigantic inferno of flames, that created a circle around the wide-eyed Samui. Naruko dropping down in front of Samui, let go off all Pokemon except for Luxray. She then let Bane appear. Blurring forward she started raining attacks on Samui, making the Kumo Kunoichi lift higher and higher, along with the Ring of Fire. Naruko then landing a punch on Samui's stomach, spun and kicked the girl down. Naruko at the pinnacle of the attack, spun around the flames into her body. She then coming down with a fury cried out, "Fire style, flame wheel jutsu." She then crashed down on Samui and smoke filled the air. When the smoke cleared Karui and Omoi gasped spotting Samui down on the ground unconscious. Naruko could be seen back to normal sitting on Samui while looking at her nails. Hayate having never seen such a show of power before cleared his throat and said, "Winner Naruko Uzumaki of Konoha." Kin hearing this cheered loudly and said, "Way to go Naruko-sama." Naruko chuckling got off of Samui and watched as the medical ninja came to carry the girl to the infirmary. Naruko now down on the floor with the other winners tuned out Sarutobi as he explained what was going to happen. She was instead sorting through the bloodlines she absorbed in He Forest. Apparently she had absorbed the Sharingan from Sasuke Tem. She blinked when Anko said, "The first match is Naruko Uzumaki versus Neji Hyuga." Rolling her eyes she could literally feel the smug look on Neji's face. Apparently the dumbass thought he was a match for her and thought that he was going to defeat her. Shaking her head she walked over to Kin and asked, "Ready to go Kin-chan?" Kin nodding blinked when Naruko summoned Bane and wrapped her arm around Kin's waist. She then screamed when Naruko jumped out of the window making them fall towards the ground. That scream was quickly followed by another, this one being of joy as Naruko started to web swing and jump through the forest heading towards the village. Naruko sitting down in front of her apartment building with the very excited Kin blinked when several Anbu appeared in front of her, including one with purple hair that she knew as Yugao Azuki, her second crush. Yugao coughing said, "Uzumaki-san, we are to escort you to the council chambers." Naruko hearing this rolled her eyes and asked, "What for?" Yugao said, "The councils wish to speak to you." Naruko hearing this knew that the civilian council was about to start bitching at her calling her a demon, while the shinobi council would just question her some. Sighing, she was about to follow the Anbu when Kin asked, "What about Samui-san, Naruko-sama?" Naruko blinking said, "Oh right, almost forgot about her." Closing her eyes, she shocked everyone by creating a clone out of symbiote. She, opening her eyes, nodded to the clone and told it to go get Samui. She then, crossing her arms, said, "We'll wait for Samui-chan." The Anbu were about to say something when the clone appeared back with a fully healed Samui. Naruko, smiling, said, "Okay, now we're ready." Yugao, shaking her head, placed a hand on the three females and used the shushin. Naruko, now finding herself in the council chambers, rolled her eyes as the civilians were already glaring at her. The shinobi were looking at her with interested eyes. The elders were looking at her like they had to take a shit. She, spotting the old man, along with Kakashi, wondered what was about to happen. Sitting down along with Kin and Samui, she rolled her eyes when a civilian stood up and said, "Demon, we demand you give us your power," and the Hirishin. Naruko, giving the man the finger, said, "I demand you go yourself, you stupid civilian dumbass." The man got incensed hearing this and screamed, "Give us the Hirishin now, demon, or we'll have you executed." Naruko, hearing this, said, "First of all, no. Second, you don't have the power to have me executed, and third, the Hirishin, the Rasengan, hell, most of the village actually belongs to me, as I'm pretty sure the Namikaze clan owns about half of this village, plus all the wrongs you shitheads have done to me, and I'm like the last living Uzumaki, so." She watched the color drain from the civilian's face and felt Bane cackle in her head. Sume Inuzuka, coughing, said, "Now on to the real reason why this meeting was called. We would like for you to explain your bloodlines." Naruko, cutting her eyes to Sume, asked, "All five?" She ignored how some people choked when she said this and how Samui and Kin gasped. A civilian with trembling hands asked, "You have 5 bloodlines?" Naruko, turning to her, said, "5 main ones." Sarutobi asked, "How many total?" She, clicking her tongue, said, 39, give or take a few. Kin, hearing this, promptly fainted, shocked at the number of bloodlines her mistress has. Samui was standing there with her jaw scraping the ground, as someone with that many bloodlines was a virtual god. Sarutobi knew about at least 2 of these, but to hear that she had 39 bloodlines shocked him. He, shaking his head, asked, "How many will you be willing to tell the council about?" Naruko, scratching her face, said, "I'll tell you about the main 5. She then, coughing, turned to Kin and Samui and said, "Pay attention, you two, as I might decide to marry you one day and you'll need to know everything about our bloodlines." Kin, hearing that Naruko might marry her one day, blushed but paid close attention. Samui, nodding, got ready to listen. Naruko, coughing again, then explained symbiote release. She, demonstrating some of its powers. Then explained synchronized release. She, smiling at the shocked look on Samui's face, said, "Now the next one is a bit complicated, or in the words of Shikamaru Nara, troublesome. You see, in a world parallel to ours there are beings known as monster girls. Monster girls are fiends who are always seeking husbands to settle down with and have with. There are several species of monster girls, with some being violent, while others are friendly. 7 of these monster girls make up my 3rd bloodline. It's called monster release, and basically it allows me to tap into the full power of the monster girls and gives me the power to destroy my opponents. The downside to this bloodline is that it leaves me extremely horny afterwards." All eyes were wide hearing this, and Kin giggled like a certain pervert, picturing Naruko using this bloodline and then ravaging her. Naruko, ignoring Kin being a pervert, said, "My 4th bloodline comes from a race of digital beings known as Digimon, who can digivolve into powerful beings, in most cases a much more powerful version of them. I have the DNA of 7 of these creatures flowing through me. I can digivolve and can gain even more powerful forms. The downside to this bloodline is that I'll be in a deep slumber from 3 weeks to 6 months, depends on how long I stay digivolved. By the way, it's called DNA digivolve release." Jaws were scraping the ground hearing this, and several of the clan heads were already making plans on drawing up peace treaties. Samui was shocked out of her mind hearing the power her new mistress had in her hands. Naruko, smiling, said, The final bloodline I'm going to tell you about is of course the Uzumaki chains. You already know what these do, so I don't really see the point in explaining them. Sarutobi, feeling as old as the dinosaurs, rubbed his face and asked, "Does anyone have any questions?" Kakashi, raising his hand, drew all attention to him. He then asked, "I am training her for the finals, right?" Everyone's sweat dropped hearing this question, but Sarutobi, nodding, said, "Yes, you are training her for the finals." He, beaming, said, "Good, as I'm going to make her into a monster." He then started to rub his hands together evilly. Naruko, ignoring this, was about to say something when Bane informed her that she needed some sleep. She then, yawning, said, "Well, since that's all to this pointless and asinine meeting, we'll be going now." She, turning to look at Kakashi, said, "I'll see you tomorrow at 10, sensei, and you'd better not be late." She then, grabbing Kin and Samui, teleported out of the room back to her home. The civilians, shaking their heads, were about to say something when 4 women literally appeared. Sarutobi, blinking, asked, "Who are you?" Kagaya, looking around, said, "This is the council chambers." The one looking like Kagaya but with red hair said, "We just missed her." The one brushing her long silver hair said, "Of course we did, I can feel the idiots in this room." The one who had the short hair, sighing, said, "We need to talk to these people about our sister." Kagaya, spotting the council for the first time, coughed and said, "Yes, you 3 go find your younger sister, I'll talk to the councils." All 3 females, nodding, vanished. Sarutobi, blinking, asked once again, "Who are you?" Kagaya, smiling, said, "My name is Kagaya Otsutsuki, and Naruko Uzumaki is my new daughter. I understand I need to explain some things to the councils and put the civilians in their place." Naruko, now in her home, was getting ready to turn in, as Kin and Samui were already situated in her room with the bed. She had refused to make them sleep on the floor or the couch. She had taken the couch and had dragged the guest sheets out, along with the pillow. She was dressed in a really big dark blue shirt and a pair of pink socks. She, rubbing her eyes and yawning, was about to turn in, when her senses started going wild. Shifting into her second Bane form, she got ready to fight if she needed to, but blinked when the 3 women from before appeared in her apartment. The first one, flipping her hair, looked around and scowled. She, picking up an empty ramen package, said, "This is no way for a princess and virtual god to live." The second one, actually looking at Naruko, scowled and said, "Her hair looks horrible. She doesn't even look like a princess." The third woman, looking at Naruko, said, "She's confused." Naruko, cracking her knuckles, said, "No, I'm confused and insulted, and you 3 have 5 seconds to explain who you are and how you got in here before I kick your asses 3 days from Sunday." The first woman, shaking her head, said, "We're your elder sisters, from your new mother." Naruko, blinking, asked, "What are you talking about?" The second woman, sighing, waved her hand and made a chair appear. Sitting down in it, she explained what they were talking about. Naruko, with Kin and Samui, were shocked. Naruko, shaking her head, asked, "So you're telling me that you're my sisters and that you're the goddesses Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi and Susanoo?" Susanoo, the one with the short hair, said, "Yes, and right now our mother is giving those idiotic civilian counselors a throughout tongue lashing." Kin, blinking, asked, "What?" Naruko, turning to her, said, "She means she's chewing them out." Kin, nodding, asked, "So why are you here, Amaterasu-sama?" Amaterasu said, "We're here to meet our little sister, but also to take you 3 to your new home." Naruko, blinking, asked, "What new home?" Tsukuyomi, still brushing her hair, said, "The new home that mother created for you and the family, including your 2 vassals." Naruko, hearing this, asked, "How far is this new home, and I don't have to change again, do I?" Susanoo, shaking her head, said, "No, as we're just going to teleport you there along with all of your stuff, and the stuff belonging to Samui and Kin." Naruko, hearing this, sighed as she was tired of changing clothes and just wanted to close her eyes for a little bit. Samui, being curious, asked, "Why else are you 3 here, as surely you could have waited until the morning for that?" Amaterasu, looking at her, said, "Smart." Well, we're here to inform our dearest sister that she has apparently inherited Mother's ability to transverse through dimensions and open portals to said dimensions. Naruko yawning said, so I can travel through dimensions, awesome, but I could already open portals to dimensions with Bane's help. All 5 females blinked hearing this and Susanoo asked, how so? Naruko yawning once more said, after you teleport us to the new home and maybe after I get some sleep. Amaterasu rolling her eyes snapped her fingers and the 5 of them were instantly sitting in the living room of a very large Gothic palace, with stone gargoyles sitting on each corner, and from what Naruko could feel several bedrooms fit for kings and queens. She yawning said, now then Bane's many times great-grandfather once let out a psychic scream of anguish so powerful that it drew others of its kind from space. Using a unwilling innocent as its host, the Venom symbiote and the extraterrestrial symbiotes constructed a portal to an alien world, the native population of which had been enthralled by the symbiotes. Bane's scream is no longer a psychic scream of anguish, but more of a ultrasonic screech that breaks through barriers of space and time to create portals to alternate dimensions. If Bane wanted to, she could create portals to other dimensions and I could easily transverse through them. Jaws touched the floor hearing this and Kin quickly asked, Naruko-sama, what else can Bane-sama do? Naruko shrugging said, we have no clue. When I say we I mean we, as neither she nor I have the slightest idea on what our limitations are. We do know that with Kakashi-sensei training us for the finals, we're going to find out. She then yawning and rubbing her eyes said, no more questions, it's bedtime. She then using Bane's webbing and some tendrils created 3 hammocks. Climbing into one she curled up and to Samui's shock was instantly sleep. Kin having seen this once smiled and said, Naruko-sama is the greatest. She then climbing in the second hammock got comfortable. Samui shaking her head said, I will try to get more answers from her tomorrow. She then climbed in the last hammock and was soon asleep. Susanoo, Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi all spotting this giggled and said, she's definitely our little sister as only someone of our lineage would do something like that. All 3 goddess walking over to Naruko smiled softly. Amaterasu leaning forward placed a gentle kiss on Naruko's forehead and said, sleep tight little sister and know that your Oni-chan is watching over you, no matter where you go. Tsukuyomi laying her brush down on the hammock kissed Naruko on the forehead and said, dream pleasant dreams dearest sister and know that I will be watching you and telling others of your actions, surely worthy of being a princess. Susanoo shaking her head leaned forward and pressed her forehead to Naruko's and said, I've got your back little sister and no matter what or where all you have to do is call and I'll be there. Also remember to calm the storm sometimes. All 3 goddesses then vanished. Naruko reaching out and grabbing the comb shifted it into a teddy bear with a pipe in his mouth. She cuddling up with the bear said, good night Oni-samas, good night Kin-chan, good night Samui-chan, good night Gigi, good night Okawa-sama, good night Kakashi-sensei, good night Ayame-chan, good night Konohamaru Baka, good night Steel Panda-chan, good night Ino-chan. She then creating a symbiote clone waited for it to settle down for some rest. When it was done she said, good night Bane-chan, don't let the bugs bite. Bane the symbiote clone snuggling into her teddy bear said, good night Naruko-chan, don't let the bed bugs bite.